I want you to think of the most sickening thing that you can imagine, and then I want you to put that thing in a thought bag and stuff it into the mind bin, because you won't be needing it after this video, because I'm going to replace it with something much more worse, as the deep conspiracy of the Kakin Empire is one of the most disturbing things to have been portrayed in all of media. And the crazy thing is, this isn't a complicated conspiracy. The answer is shockingly simple, horrifically even. And I believe that this is Yoshihiro Togashi's magnum opus in regards to his commentary on humanity as a whole. Hunter x Hunter is a series that commenced being published in 1998, and it has evolved radically over almost 3 decades, mirroring its author's evolution and his views on life in general. We've had some pretty crazy shifts in characters, themes, and even the entire genre of the manga, which at this point, I'm not convinced can be accurately defined, but the one thing that has persisted since at least York New City has been Togashi's thesis on wealth and suffering. One of the more enduring explorations in Hunter x Hunter is this theme that great wealth can only come at great expense. And the Kakin Empire was created as a be-all and end-all exploration of this, which at certain points in Hunter x Hunter, Togashi really hammers into us. Probably the first time that it was so clearly referenced was with a montage near the end of the Chimera Ant arc, where Togashi crams as much unjust human suffering as he can into 2 pages, and then follows that up by drawing the exact opposite. Luxury clothes, cars, jewelry, banquets, and wealth beyond most of our wildest imaginations. That is how Togashi views humanity, with that juxtaposition of all or nothing. There is no in the middle. And I think the best panel in this montage to describe that is this one, where you have a celebrity walking away from a limo into a function on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street you have a group of homeless people starving in an alley. Just like Nen, there is a cost to everything. Great power can only come with great sacrifice. However, unlike Nen, that cost is not paid by the person acquiring the wealth. The sacrifice is made by someone else. And so if someone is living in extreme, unbelievable luxury, then it means that someone else, or in fact many someone else's, must be living in unimaginable suffering. In some cases, that may be an unintentional effect. However, the Kakin Empire is designed as an almost industrial application of this principle. Its monarchy innately understand that their wealth and well-being is supplemented by the suffering of others, and so they go out of their way to create suffering in order to build wealth. Because the mindset is a little bit more twisted than just great wealth comes at great cost. With the king and a few of the princes, the theory is more like, if I can create the greatest amount of suffering possible, then I will be rewarded with the greatest wealth and power possible, because things have gone so far that they are reverse engineering the equation. And one of the best demonstrations of this comes from chapter 406, where the Phantom Troop are being led through the Black Whale 1, and we see its incredibly extensive sewerage system, which was located between tiers 4 and tier 5 of the ship. Now, to be clear, putting the system here was not a logistical necessity. It was placed between these 2 tiers intentionally as a symbol that the citizens located on tier 5 carried even less value than the waste of the people in tiers 1 through 4. The structure of Kakin society is a series of dedicated castes. Everyone, and I mean everyone in the empire, is born for the purpose of sacrifice in one way or another, with one of the most extreme examples being the have-nots, who are currently being used by Second Prince Camilla as the bearers of Nen curses that can only be unleashed after death. These people, the have-nots, are literally born to die. And whilst they are officially recognized as the lowest caste of Kakin, there are potentially other castes which would be worse to be born into. The Kakin Empire is built on a principle of well-administered barbarism. And when I say barbaric, which I didn't, I said barbarism, but let's pretend I did say barbaric. When I say barbaric, I don't mean the cool muscle tanks that you can find in the sponsor of today's video, Raid Shadow Legends, which is canonically my favorite mobile game that I've been playing now for many years. I know that pretty much everyone watching this video will have heard of Raid Shadow Legends, but what not everyone will know is that it is a genuinely good game. Raid is the gold standard of pocket playtime, and those standards have only been rising over time, with a relentless barrage of new content and so many engaging factions such as the Barbarians, the rugged, powersome emissaries of brute force and unbreakable loyalty. I love Barbarians because they're surprisingly versatile. You'd think that they're just there to rock up and just smack things, but they're not. They can do so many other things because they're very very presence brings about debuffs to your enemies who are no doubt soiling in their loincloths. And my barbarian of choice is generally Elder Skarg. I like how he hits the things, but as you can see, other barbarians have quite a lot of appeal going for them as well. And to engage in such appeal, you can and should download Raid through my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to immediately receive a huge starter pack featuring the absolute boss that is Ultimate Galek, and you'll get another starter pack after reaching level 15 featuring an epic Zargala to pair with your Galek. They're a bit of a power couple in the raid world. Plus, after downloading through my link, please use the promo code Desert Queen to get a legendary champion to Hanorrak for free. And new and existing players can also redeem 2 more codes that are listed in the description. Plus, you can come and find me under the name Grandline Review and join my clan. So definitely give Raid a go like I did a few years ago. But for now, it's back to you, me. And those that may be worse revolve around a horrific Kakin event known as Carnival, a special festival held at a randomly selected village where every resident is designated as either an entertainer or an other. Neither role is good news, and all it really does is inform a person of how they are intended to be sacrificed. And Togashi was, oh my god, mate, this is so good. He was extremely intentional with how he named this festival. Carnival is the root where the word carnival comes from, with Carnival, or I guess carnelevare, being a Latin expression that literally means remove meat. Although it has also been argued that carnival comes from carnevale, meaning farewell to meat, which I only bring up because the official Viz translation translates carnelevare as the latter, a farewell to flesh, despite literally meaning the former, remove meat. I guess it doesn't really matter either way. I mean, the former, it is a much more brutal representation, but the phrase is intended to signify a release of inhibition, an event where you abandon the body and free the spirit, although Togashi has given it a much more twisted meaning. Togashi himself is very focused on the idea of meat, and that is a core aspect of Kakin culture. And with this festival, I would say it's a lot less about freeing the spirit and much more about specifically focusing on the meat in so many different ways. As carne is also the root word of carnal, meaning physically and generally sexual needs. And that is what the designated entertainers of carnelevare are intended to serve. If you are given the role of entertainer, then it is your job to satisfy every physical desire of the Kakin monarchy, and this is legally enshrined within Kakin law due to a concept known as lèse-majesté, something that has existed in real-world societies, but as it pertains to the Kakin Empire, it is defined as an offense against the crown punishable by death. Allegedly, before modern times, this included civilians even looking a royal in the face. That was punishable by death, but it's implied that the modern Kakin Empire doesn't enforce that anymore. However, an offense that is covered is any use of contraception or abortion in regards to royals. To be clear, both of those things are perfectly legal outside of the monarchy, but they are illegal to use if you are a royal or if you are with a royal. And now what Togashi is trying to say here by juxtaposing carnelevare and lèse-majesté is that it is punishable by death to behave in any way that constitutes an offense against the crown, such as refusing the advances of a member of the royal family. And it's also illegal to use contraception during said advances, and it's illegal to have an abortion after the advances. And so the truth of what's happening here is even more horrifying than the idea of these laws existing simply to satisfy the physical urges of the monarchy. It's nowhere near as short-sighted as that. And these laws essentially exist so that any woman within the Kakin Empire can at any time be forced to have a child. And those children are then used as various types of sacrifices for the empire to continue building great wealth and to continue paying the cost for that wealth. The Kakin monarchy knows that to sustain its great power, they require an equal amount of sacrifice, and that is what these carnivals are intended to do. They are people farms, and one life that resulted from carnelevare was Morenna Prudhoe, who described her mother's experience as the following. My mother was forced to entertain the royals for several days without rest or sleep. She was unable to even be aware that she'd become pregnant or given birth to me, and finally died when I was 2 years old. Morenna's mother wasn't treated like a human. Morenna's mother essentially became an incubator, a piece of equipment that was required to produce a sacrifice. The implication being that during carnelevare, her mother was drugged, then forced to serve the Kakin royalty, and perpetually re-drugged all throughout her pregnancy until Morenna was born, and possibly even continued to be after she was born. When Morenna was first introduced, we even saw a brief flashback of her birth, and Morenna's mother's arms and legs are restrained into a birthing position. And and after Morenna's birth, her mother was held in an underground hospital until she died 2 years later, with this process being described as being treated with quotation marks, which is the sacrifice that Morenna's mother was born to make to sustain the empire. It was her duty to become an incubator. But what happens to the children from here is that they become Carnival orphans and are sorted into two groups. The Kakin Empire really loves to do that. Each orphan either becomes a second track faker, which is the better option of the two, meaning that they are recognized as the children of royals, but are enlisted into the underground mafia factions that run a surprising amount of the empire, and in some cases they can even rise to become high-ranking or even bosses of those factions. Honestly, not the worst life as far as Kakin society goes, because the other designation is infinitely worse. The rest of the Carnival orphans are, quote, scientifically sorted into the category of meat or flesh depending on the translation, which Togashi disturbingly vividly portrays as a knife slicing a vaginal opening into a slab of meat. And while the role of meat is never clearly defined by Morenna, there is obviously a heavy sex trafficking implication. However, it's very unlikely to just stop at that. I'm sure that a concept as broad as meat can serve many purposes, none of which are good for the meat. And Morenna herself stated that there have been 7 batches of Carnival orphans to date, which leaves us with 2 disturbing implications. The first of which is that because Morenna is in her early 20s, it means that quite a few of the princes we know were present at the Carnival that produced her, and one of those princes may well be her biological father. Although this does get slightly confusing because we should recognize that Morenna Prudhoe is not actually Morenna Prudhoe. The woman that we see in Hunter x Hunter is a meat orphan who killed Morenna Prudhoe and stole her identity as a second track faker. So while Morenna was said to be the illegitimate daughter of King Narsabi, she doesn't actually exist anymore. And we have no idea who this woman calling herself Morenna actually is, or which cursed seed of the Kakin monarchy created her. All that we do know is that it probably wasn't the king himself, otherwise Morenna may have been sorted into the second track fakers to begin with. But the second disturbing implication is that 7 batches of orphans isn't all that many, at least not considering that Kakin is potentially thousands of years old. What that means is that Carnival is a relatively recent addition to Kakin society, potentially instituted under the reign of King Narsabi, and it was likely done to increase the number of sacrifices available to continue to satisfy the indefatigable greed of the empire. And in chapter 382, Togashi blows this wide open. He provides us with a very concise summary of what the Kakin Empire is, its darkest nature, within a single panel. This is the chapter where 9th Prince Hulkenberg marches into King Narsabi's quarters with the intention to kill him to put a halt to the succession contest, and within Narsabi's room is a rather grand and impressive collection of art. But there's only one of these arts that Togashi chooses to focus on, which is this curious image of a monstrous being consuming a human body. And this is a real painting. It is Saturn devouring one of his sons by Francisco Goya. Although I should say that this was part of an unnamed series of works by Goya, and the name was assigned to it after Goya's death, assuming the subject matter, which is a fair assumption because the myth of Saturn and or Kronos, depending on if we want to go Roman or Greek, has been a relatively common topic for artists throughout history. However, what separates Goya's work and what Togashi really wants to hammer in is the depiction of madness. Previous attempts at tackling the subject matter portray Saturn and or Kronos as very cold but logical and human, whereas Goya turns Saturn into a much more savage and definitely non-human entity. Which is what Togashi is trying to do with the Kakin Empire, particularly the monarchy. He's taking these esteemed figures and breaking them down into these savage beings, each afflicted with their own personal brand of madness. And speaking of madness, it gets worse because Goya did not paint this on a canvas. No, he painted it on the wall of his home. It wasn't commissioned and it was never supposed to be publicly shown. This was just a private slice of madness intended only for him, which is something that Togashi has reflected very, very well with the nature of the succession contest. As much as it does involve and definitely affects the entire Kakin Empire, it is also an extremely private family affair. No one who lives outside of the inner walls of the monarchy has any idea of the true scale of madness and depravity happening within those walls. But the aspect of the painting that most disturbs me, and something that Togashi has really picked up and run with, is the fact that Goya painted this on his dining room wall. When he ate meals, that's what he was looking at. which very much adds to the Kakin obsession with meat, because it's not just the Carnival orphans who are designated as meat. Everyone in Kakin society eventually becomes meat for the Empire to devour. Even King Nasibi's own children, the princes, were born to be sacrifices. The succession contest requires that all but one of them become meat to feed the Empire, and even King Nasibi himself is ultimately supposed to be consumed for this purpose as well. The really horrific truth is that regardless of where you're born in Kakin society, it is your destiny to be consumed. From have-not to king, it doesn't matter. Your birth just dictates how far back you stand in line for the meat grinder. If you're a Carnival orphan, then you're first up. If you're a prince, then yeah, you'll be waiting in line for a while. And even longer if you manage to become the king, but you will eventually become meat. This painting is the one image that most accurately and concisely explains the Kakin Empire, whose hunger never ceases. Because the larger and more powerful the empire becomes, the more it needs to devour to sustain itself. Which brings us back to the Togashi thesis of great wealth only coming at great expense. The Kakin Empire is set on becoming the wealthiest and most powerful nation in human history, and they are ready to pay any price necessary to attain that. And that is Nasibi's plan after all. The Black Whale 1 is a vessel designed to carry 200,000 people, not because that's what they would need to settle the Dark Continent, but because Nasibi plans on sacrificing those 200,000 lives for the prosperity of the Empire. That is how far this need to consume has taken us. And at this rate, there won't even be enough people left in Kakin to satisfy the hunger of the Empire, which will only grow. It is going to need to reach out and consume the rest of the world as well. In an ever maddening endeavor, just like Goya's depiction of Saturn devouring one of his sons. Although something that may or may not be relevant is that we're not even sure if the figure being eaten in this painting is male. Several art scholars have spent a pretty wild amount of time analyzing the uneaten buttocks of the human and have argued that their curvaceous nature indicates a female. So we've got some ambiguity going on here, and that is very Hunter x Hunter. Togashi loves gender ambiguity, and it's pretty perfect work to reference the Kakin Empire. Because gender is entirely meaningless within the monarchy, male or female, every child of the king is referred to as a prince, and should a woman win the succession contest, then she will become king, and I would imagine that any male partner would become queens. Part of this is due to the exhaustive Kakin legal system, as we've already somewhat explored, but individuals are given certain rights based on very specific titles like king, queen, and prince, and so those titles are applied uniformly and ironically to remove ambiguity. And to go back to Morenna, after hearing all of this, it's very easy to get on board with her desire to destroy the Kakin Empire and put an end to this meat production cycle. However, she is also using the methods of the Kakin Empire to do so. Her ability requires sacrifices to level up herself as well as other members of her family, and currently on the Black Whale, the Haley family have even developed a meat disposal operation to deal with the bodies of their victims, which I think only goes to emphasize the idea that Togashi's trying to express here. It's not just the Kakin monarchy that are propagating this, it is the empire itself. The entire thing is rotten. It has become an entity of its own that no individual can dictate, and all aspects of Kakin culture are now built around the consumption of the meat of its people. And someone who has taken great inspiration from the practices of the Kakin Empire is Beyond Netero, an outsider who has fathered an unknown amount of children within the Empire and afflicted them with an end curse, intending to sacrifice them for the sake of his own goals. And I have no doubt that Beyond did this after learning how Kakin sustains itself, and he may have well even been present for a Carnival or two, because his system isn't all that different from what was happening there. Beyond's children have all been sorted into two categories: those who were afflicted with greater curses and those afflicted with lesser curses. And while the exact purpose and effect of these curses can only be speculated at this stage, this is the result of a Nen genius having been inspired by the unconscious meat practices of Kakin. And it's a very, very dangerous game that Beyond is playing here, because what he's aiming to do is take advantage of a system without fulfilling its ultimate purpose. The Kakin Empire at this point is not an individual. It's not even a small group of people. Even the king only has so much power and is intended to become meat to feed to the entity that is the hungry empire. The hunger of the Kakin Empire has gotten completely out of control, and that is the monster that Beyond Netero is trying to take advantage of. And perhaps he will be able to tame this beast, but there's also every chance that Beyond Netero could end up becoming devoured and succumb to the grand fate of meat.